Hey everyone, and welcome back. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. In this explainer, we're going to unpack some highly opinionated political commentary that was recently published online, and it paints a very specific picture of the upcoming political landscape. The central premise of our source material today is that a perfect storm of massive campaign cash, shifting polling data, and high party morale is currently brewing for the GOP ahead of the 2026 midterms. We're going to look strictly at the data and the claims being presented to understand exactly how this narrative is built. To break all this down, we're going to look at four key areas today. First up, the midterm financial war, followed by Democratic polling deficits, then DNC debt and scams, and finally, GOP morale and approval. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the midterm financial war, and tracking those campaign war chests. So get a load of this number, $260 million. That is a staggering amount of money, right? Citing Axios, the source points out this is exactly what Elon Musk's America PAC spent to help elect Donald Trump in 2024. And here's the kicker. This highly funded PAC isn't just packing up and going home. It is reportedly being revived specifically for the 2026 midterms to boost Republican voter turnout. So how exactly are they planning to spend all that cash? Well, the strategy is built on a few core tactics. We're talking aggressive door-knocking initiatives, massive digital advertising campaigns, and old-school direct mail outreach. Now, as you probably know, midterm elections historically suffer from pretty low voter turnout, but the source notes that this PAC's explicit goal is to target and activate those conservative base voters who usually just stay home during non-presidential election years. It's basically an attempt to turn a traditional midterm weakness into a massive tactical advantage. And it's actually not just Musk's PAC either. The commentary notes that various GOP super PACs currently hold a massive $300 million plus advantage over their Democratic counterparts. Oh, and by the way, to add some context, the commentary notes that this figure doesn't even include an alleged $400 million reportedly just sitting in Trump's MAGA Inc. super PAC. So the main takeaway the source is driving home here is the firm conclusion that dollar for dollar, the GOP is currently outgunning Democrats on the campaign trail. Which brings us to Section 2, Democratic polling deficits and analyzing the latest Quinnipiac data. To see how that cash advantage pairs up with public opinion, the commentator points us to a recent Quinnipiac poll, and it highlights a really specific demographic struggle. According to this data, only 20% of men nationwide currently approve of the Democratic Party. Let that sink in, and that's paired with a staggering 71% disapproval rating among men of all ages. The commentary leverages these numbers to pose a pretty tough question. How exactly can the Democratic Party successfully compete when they're facing a deficit that steep with male voters? And the source draws a pretty stark historical contrast here to really drive this home. Think back to the 2018 midterms. That's when Democrats successfully took back control of the House. Back then, they held a net national approval rating of +1 point. But looking ahead to 2026, the party's net national approval has plummeted to -24 points. The commentator points to this massive 25-point downward swing as, frankly, a historically terrible metric for the party's brand. Now let's pivot a bit to Section 3. DNC debt and scams, looking at some serious financial headaches at headquarters. So in stark contrast to the GOP's cash pile we talked about earlier, the source claims the DNC is heading into the midterm season with more debt than cash. To illustrate just how tight things are, they highlight that the DNC was allegedly forced to take out a $15 million line of credit, and to get it, they had to use their own physical brick-and-mortar headquarters building in Washington, D.C. as collateral. The commentator frames this as a highly desperate move, just to finance the upcoming election season. And to really cap off this argument, the source brings up a pretty surprising detail. The DNC recently lost nearly $29,000 to, get this, an email scammer who was impersonating Chairman Ken Martin. Now, the commentator impartially leverages this specific, kind of wild incident to sharply question their overall financial competency. Their argument is basically, if party leadership can't even protect their own funds from a basic email scam, how can voters trust them to manage the broader American economy? Okay, moving on to our final section. Section 4, GOP morale and approval, and confidence in the conservative base. So how is all of this impacting morale? Well, the source pulls up some CNN data that really paints a picture as to why conservative morale is so high. If you look at 21st century second-term own party approval ratings, Donald Trump is currently sitting at an 83% approval rating among Republicans. The commentator is quick to emphasize that this is literally the highest second-term own party rating of the whole century, especially when you stack it up against George W. Bush and Barack Obama. It proves that his influence over the base remains remarkably intact. And because of these rock-solid numbers, GOP leaders seem, well, remarkably unbothered by the traditional risks a midterm election usually poses. Donald Trump is described by the source as being totally nonchalant about the risk of losing the House, while Speaker Mike Johnson has reportedly stated he grows more confident every single day. The source argues that this confidence isn't just baseless bravado. It's directly justified by that exact combination of high internal approval, massive financial backing, and those steep polling deficits their opponents are facing that we just walked through. Which brings us to our final thought. The source lays out a very compelling, albeit highly partisan narrative built on some very specific financial metrics and polling data. But, as we all know, politics is rarely static. Things change in the blink of an eye. So I want to leave you with this question to chew on. Will this combination of massive war chests and polling deficits ultimately define the 2026 midterms exactly as this commentator predicts? Or is there still plenty of time for the political landscape to shift yet again? Keep a critical eye on the data as we move forward. Thank you so much for joining me for today's explainer, and as always, keep asking questions.